And hello, welcome to codeLive. Thank you very much for joining me this day. I'm always happy to share knowledge with you all. But today we have the honor to have a guest, and we will be learning from him. Please go ahead in the chat. Tell me, where are you joining from? Give us a shout. Tell us what do you want to see next in the upcoming episodes of codeLive. We will always want to create great content for you. I want to share something before we start. So let me go and share my screen as usual. Remember that we have the Salesforce Developers website. Here you can find our recent videos, blog posts, podcasts, everything that we are creating for you. Also, this is where you go to find the documentation and our available APIs. I will recommend you to take a look at our recent blog post, which is a retrospective of Trailblazer DX for developers, where Philip Osil is showing us all of the different announcements, demos, sessions that matter to us, developers. So go ahead, take a look at the blog post and read it after the session, of course, because we will be sharing with our guests and learning a lot. Also, remember that we have the Salesforce Developers YouTube channel where I hope you are watching us today. And here you will find all of the different videos we create and publish for you and the upcoming live streams, both codeLive and our Salesforce Developers AMAs or Ask Me Anything. Next week, we will have Alba Rivas. She will be talking about developer tools from scratch. Then we will have the opportunity to learn more about Code Builder and VS Code. And then we will continue the series that we are going to start today. But I am not going to get ahead of that. First, I want to invite our guest. Hey, Jeff. Hello. Welcome to codeLive.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Looking forward to this.
Awesome. So, Jeff, please, why you don't introduce yourself to our audience?
Sure. So my name is Jeff Douglas. I'm the principal technical program manager at Trailhead. Right now, I'm in charge of credentials and a lot of super badge security, but probably like a lot of you out there, I started as a Salesforce developer. I got my first developer job with Salesforce back in 2007. Back before there was Apex, it was still all JavaScript back then. And then I worked as a consultant for about 7 years with Aperio. It got bought by Wipro. So I was on the road running and gunning and slinging code for a long time across the US. And then in 2016, I joined Salesforce to start this thing called a small little tiny thing called Trailhead.
Nice.
Yeah, it was this last bullet point in the developers keynote and at Dreamforce. And I talked to the guys there at Salesforce, and they wanted me to come over and start on the developer side of the house. So it was me and Chris Duarte and Sam Deep, and we started Trailhead. And I ran the developer side, made tools, and then I was on the team that actually built the hands-on challenge assessments engine. So when you hit that check challenge button, that's the service that I wrote with one of their services. It actually checks challenges. So, I've been doing that for a long time, about 8 years now at Salesforce. I guess it's my street cred you wanted me to tell, right? So I was one of the first MVPs back in 2010. I think there were 6 of us back then, and been having fun ever since on the Salesforce platform, doing all kinds of stuff. And recently I did a stint at MuleSoft where I kind of fell in love with that whole side of the house. And so I like that whole integration between Salesforce and MuleSoft. So that's what we're going to be talking about today.
You have quite the experience, and we share something, a passion in common, which is sharing knowledge and education, and that's great. And pretty much this is the space for that. codeLive, as I've been talking to you offline, is the place where we share how we work with the developer community. We also show our vulnerabilities. We commit mistakes. We go on ahead and read the documentation. This is to demystify the role of the developer and to let other people learn with us. This is I call it a collaborative learning initiative, and it's great. We have a lot of people right now in the chat. They are saying hello. We have Tech Lead. Jose Dimas also is joining us. Omar Moreno, Santanu, Roy, Eric. So thank you very much for joining to this session. But Jeff, let's start with what we are interested in. Tell us, because remember, this is going to be a three-part series, but what are we going to learn? And let me share your screen with the audience. So, what are we
Gotcha.
going to learn on this series?
So we're going to take an existing app on Salesforce, something super simple, just a Lightning Web Component with a controller and some classes that makes callouts to a SOAP service and a REST service. And we're going to say this is kind of an old code, and you're basically a new project member in this team, and you want to make it better and add some features to it. So we're going to show you how to actually take that code and lift and shift it from Salesforce to MuleSoft to make it much easier to extend and to maintain.
Oh, fantastic. So, okay, we have your slides in there. So, guide us through what are we going to be doing on those 3 days.
So this is the UI for the app. Now, my goal was to make it as ugly as possible, and I think I did a pretty good job. It's essentially just one, and I'll jump in the org in a second and show you this, but it's essentially just a Lightning component where you can search for airline flights. So you can search by destination, and then you can click on a flight and see the details, flight number, destination, how much the price is, and all that kind of good stuff. So not a lot of functionality in this, just something to get you going. And so we'll talk about how that works down the road here. So in the back end on this, so the great thing about this is we're doing a lift and shift of the back end. So the front end won't change at all, which is great. You just change the controllers that are making the calls, and the front end will not be touched at all. So we probably won't go into a lot of the front end unless you want to see the code, but there's not a ton there for obvious reasons. So the current architecture is there's a controller that has an Apex class attached to it, and it makes a SOAP callout to an endpoint for Delta Airlines. It allows you to do the search for Delta. And there's another REST API that allows you to search for United flights, and it brings all that information back in the call and shows it to you in a consolidated view. So that's kind of what it is now. It's kind of an old code. It's been around for a few years. Not a lot of best practice in there right now. So your job, let's say you're a brand new consultant, or you're a developer at your company, and you get a new boss, and your boss says, hey, we love this application. It's probably the best thing we've ever written in this company. But we want to make it better. We want to do a bunch of things to it. So some of the things they want to do to it is they want to make this service discoverable by people in IT and other developers, so that way they can use it. So they can go look at this API and see, oh, is this something we can use in our project? What are the calls? What are the responses we get out of it? Is there any kind of governance around it? Do we need the API token? Do we need client ID and client secret? What do we need? So that allows them to look at the code and kind of interact with it and develop with it. We want it to also be accessible, consumable, and reusable by developers. So right now it's in the Salesforce org, where it's not super easy to get to. What if the mobile team wants to use this service to look up flights? What if they want to put it on their Jekyll website or whatever, then look at that way. So we want it to be reusable by developers, so we get a lot of reuse out of it. And then we want to have some governance. So we want to make sure that it's security, that we've got the right people looking at it for scalability and security. So all that centralized management of this API. And then we want to have SLAs around monitoring and scalability. So we want it to scale, and we want to be able to see what's going on with this. So unlike the Salesforce part, we can't really see if the service is up, if it's having issues, if, let's say, one of the endpoints is having a hard time. That's going to be really hard to see in Salesforce. But with the monitoring that you get baked in with Anypoint Platform, we're going to be able to do this as well. So they're going to want to also, go ahead.
This is something great, and pretty much the title of the series, Revamp and Power Up, is this. We are taking a simple API and we are taking it to the next level. So it is going to be production ready, maintainable, scalable, and it can be used by a larger team.
Correct. Plus future enhancements. So let's say, for instance, the project manager says now, hey, we got Delta United search, but we want to add American Airlines, and they've got a great Postgres database that we can use. Have you ever tried to use a Postgres database natively in Apex? Super hard. Yeah. So we're going to show you how to do that too. And also, let's say you want to add another SOAP endpoint. Anybody who's used WSDL to Apex knows that it can be cantankerous, when you try to add your wizard there, it may not like your schema, so you may end up handwriting all your SOAP Apex classes, which is not a lot of fun. So luckily with Endpoint Platform, it's really a breeze to add SOAP endpoints to an application. So we're going to look at doing that as well. All right. So this is, any questions on that?
Well, I I see also that one of the challenges is that we have now three different source of data that have different interfaces. SOAP is way different than REST, even though those are going to be web endpoints, but those two things are way different beasts. And PostgreSQL, of course, you will need to have some sort of driver to do the network connection. So having those three connected to a single point or a single API, it is not an easy task. So this is not trivial.
Correct.
What we are trying to do here.
That's a good thing you mentioned was that, the different forms of the data that comes back for the SOAP and the REST and the database. One of the great things about it is we're going to leverage data weave, and we're going to make it a schema that comes back to Salesforce that looks like the exact same service is being called. So Salesforce won't know. It just knows that it's calling one endpoint to one service, and it gets back some data. And one of the great things about that is if you want to add a third or a fourth, a fifth, or a sixth service, Salesforce won't even know you're adding those in there because it's all being done on the MuleSoft side, and it comes back as the same results. So that's really nice for the end user. They won't know what's been happening, and you can have someone who's just working on the endpoint side and not necessarily the Apex side, and they can figure out how to do this and send results back for different services as they're available. So that's a great point.
Great. I have a question. Logman, is my voice better now? I increased the gain on my microphone. So let me know if you don't hear us or if you are like having trouble watching on the screen. If the resolution is too low, let us know and I will be able to fix that here behind the scenes. We have a question from Tech Lead. Hey Jeff, MuleSoft is also getting vast day by day, like Salesforce, of course. There is MuleSoft RPA, MuleSoft Composer, Data Weave, etc. What will be the roadmap to learn MuleSoft as a Salesforce developer?
Well, glad you asked. There's actually a brand new training course at Trailhead Academy you can look at. It's one I wrote. It's a 5-day course. It's called Salesforce Hyperautomation with MuleSoft, and it uses, let's see, what does it have there? It has Endpoint Platform, it has RPA, it has Einstein chatbots, it has flows, it has orchestrator, it has a ton of stuff in there. And if you want to really learn the hyper automation of all these technologies together, that's a great place to do it. So I think on my website, jeffdouglas.com, there's a video of the app that you build during this class, and it kind of walks you through it. So if you go to jeffdouglas.com, you'll see there's a link to that, and you can read more about it. But that's a great place to get started.
Oh, nice. Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so how are we going to do all of this, Jeff?
Great question. That's a great softball question, Julian. Thank you. So this is the new architecture that your project manager wants you to implement. So basically move everything over to MuleSoft and then implement the API for Delta and for United and the endpoint for Postgres for American into one API, and then send those results back to Salesforce. So that's kind of where we're going to go. So we went from this, and now we're going to implement this right here. Okay? That makes sense. And so, of course, like I said, you can always add more onto here if you want to add a fourth service or a fifth, or maybe I don't know, Southwest has an API that you can implement. You can add that to it as well quite easily by just changing the API.
Also, and also if I want to implement the same service on different orgs or distribute these as a package, now I have one single API instead of embedding the code into what you are distributing. So the architecture
Correct.
is going to be more scalable and maintainable at this point.
Correct.
Beautiful.
Okay, so like you said, this is going to be a 3-day video, more or less. So the first day we're going to design the API. So we're going to look at the existing code we have now for this app. We're going to take the API that we're going to build, or take the extra code that is being used in Salesforce and convert that into an API using RAMA, which is the RESTful API Mine language on the Endpoint Platform. So we're going to design that API. Then we're going to mock that up. So you can use the mock service to actually call the API before it's even built. And then we're going to make the API discoverable. We're going to add it to Anypoint Exchange, so that way people on your team can find this easily and interact with it and provide feedback and see if it fits for their application. So day 2, which I think it says in 3 weeks, is we're going to implement the API in Anypoint Studio. So Anypoint Studio is an Eclipse-based tool right now, and I think you just said you're going to be having someone on a code builder, which is more of a Visual Studio Code for MuleSoft. That's coming up. That's been beta right now. So we're going to use the Eclipse-based IDE for that this week. Then we're going to hit connectors. We're going to show how to use the connectors to connect to SOAP endpoints, REST endpoints, and databases. And then we're going to also use DataWeave, and we're going to transform the services into one format that we can send back to Salesforce. And then finally, we're going to take that API and we're going to deploy it to Cloud Hub. We're going to get our REST endpoint, and then we're going to make calls to that from Salesforce. Okay. And then finally, on day 3, we're going to refactor our old Apex code. So we're going to take that code and we're going to strip out all the code that we don't need, refactor it to use the API. We're going to remove all the mocks that we have written for the tests and everything that we don't need. And then finally, we're going to look at that. And then we're going to use some new cool stuff called external services from MuleSoft that allows us to call this API easier in Apex code or even in flows as well. So that's what we're going to do on day 3. So that should be fun as well.
Pretty much design, implement, and refactor.
Correct.
One good thing, we have covered external services here in codeLive, both with Flow and with Apex, but using a third-party OpenAPI. Usually I deploy that OpenAPI to Heroku. But now we are going to showcase on day 3, there is a new feature, like a Salesforce feature, that makes this way easier. So
yes,
great that we are going to be learning a lot of new stuff here. Even myself, I have not worked with MuleSoft. Honestly, just did a couple of things, so I will be learning a lot. And maybe in the future, we will have more MuleSoft content here in codeLive as well.
That sounds great. I'm sure it's going to be up and coming in the Salesforce ecosystem.
Definitely.
Okay, so enough slides. Let's go ahead and jump into some of the code. Let's go look at the app first. How does that sound? So I've got this installed on a. Let's go take a look and see what this looks like. And of course, it always opens up in the wrong browser. Okay. Okay, so here's our org right here, our Scratch org. And here's our app. So it's one Lightning Web component on this homepage. And there's a couple of events. There's one event, it's a search event. You can click that and you can go ahead and get all the records from both services come back. You can see there's Delta and we've got United there. Or we can just do it by airline. Or I'm sorry, by destination. Or we can get super spectacular, fun, exciting application. But it does have some cool stuff. So I can, of course, click on this as the event, and it shows the details over here. All right. So that's kind of the extent of the app right there. All right. So like I said, we're not changing anything in the front end. The front end we're not even going to touch that at all. So we're going to kind of focus more on the back end. Okay. So let's go look at some code here. So, all right. So here's our code. And so we've got a couple things here. We've got a bunch of we got a Lightning Web component, which I don't know if you want to see much of it, but it's pretty straightforward. A lot of SLDS in there. It's got it's got some handlers on here. You can see to get the destination, handle the destination change. We execute the code. We get the code. We get the flights by code. We execute the flight search. And those, of course, call the backend controllers for that. So you can see we're using these controllers right here. Okay, the flight service controller. Any questions on this part right here? It's pretty straightforward. Okay, so we also have some remote sites. We have one for the Heroku app, which is the REST endpoint, and we have one also for the SOAP endpoint. So we got those as well in there. Work out well. So So the code here. So the good stuff is in the classes, of course. So we got a couple things here. So you notice whenever you are using a SOAP service and you run with Apex, it generates async and a sync class for you. So we got all these classes right here for Delta because this is the SOAP service. So we've got the sync, the async and the sync, and then we've got the actual flight class. So the flight is just basically a class that models the data that comes back from the APIs or from the endpoints. That's all that is. So you can see we've got the fields on here. These ones are going to show up on the UI, and then we've got a constructor here where you can actually send in the flight record from the actual SOAP endpoint, and that'll construct that for you and make that much easier to work with.
That
So
that one is used also for JSON serialization, or
this one is, yes. I'll show
okay.
you that too. Yes. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
Jeff, we have a question and maybe a request. The question from Valerian: can we import Swagger file to integrate with OpenAPI? Same way we can do it with Salesforce external services.
So the MuleSoft services they use RAML instead of OpenAPI. So it's a different format, a different. So you can use OpenASI, but we use RAML when we do the integration with Salesforce and MuleSoft, which is very similar. We use Swagger at Trailhead, and I didn't find much difficulty moving from Swagger over to the RAML. So I think you'll find it pretty straightforward.
Okay, beautiful. And the other request is maybe if you can give us one level of zoom, because some folks are watching on their mobile devices, so better.
Sure.
Oh, that's perfect. Thank you very much.
All right. So another class we want to look at is what's called the flight service. This is all the heavy lifting. So the flight service, it actually does the call out. So you see there's a search method where it sets as a parameter the destination, and then it calls the Delta flights and the United flights, and it returns those collections both to this collection of new flights. And then it returns that, and that's what you see in the UI, is when you hit search, it makes a call outs and returns this collection of flights. So if you look at down here, so the Delta flights, so let's see if I can Delta flights. I'm gonna do United flights first. So the United flights, you can have a destination come in there. So the destination in, there's our endpoint on here. And if there's a destination, it actually appends that to the URL, and then it calls the endpoint. Now, this, you can notice this is an older code. It should use external services, but we haven't implemented that yet in here because it's a little bit older. So we call that. We look at the status code. If it's a 200, we deserialize the JSON that comes back as untyped. So we get a collection of a list of objects. We enter a list of objects, and then we create a new flight map. And then we add all the code that comes back to this flight object that we just saw a minute ago. So that just basically for each record that comes back, we create a new flight object. We add it to the collection of flights, and then we pass that collection back to the Lightning Web component. All right.
This approach, even though it works, it is more low level and require a lot of more work. Like
yes.
More boilerplate, like defining the fields by pretty much one by one, handling the HTTP requests natively. This is why at the end having it with external services is going to be quite the change. More abstraction will increase also maintainability for this.
Correct. The next one we have is the same thing with the service. We have where you can get a flight by code. So you have its ID, so it's code over. It appends the code to that, calls the endpoint again, and does the same thing. It if it's a 200, it deserializes the type again, and it creates that flight object, all the flight objects, adds it to that collection, and then sends that collection back. So it's pretty much the same thing. It's just that you specify a certain code, and it's searching for that code in the API. So let's go look at that API real quick. I've got it right here, actually. So this is the API. This is the REST API we just looked at. So it returns a collection of these records right here, and you can do destination SFO. There's SFO. We can do CLE. I'll bring those back too. So that's basically what's fallen in that code we just looked at.
TPA. Do we have any data for our region?
We don't have TPA. Yeah,
Ah, we don't have TPA.
at trombone. Yeah, Julian and I both live near each other near Tampa. So
Yeah,
okay, so we got that.
almost
So then
neighbors.
almost neighbors. Yeah, we should do it at your house. You have a much better setup than I do. Okay, so now we look at the Delta. So the Delta one's a little bit different because that one is a SOAP endpoint. So you see when you call this get code, it calls this get code. If it looks and says it starts with a U, that means it's it's united, and a D is Delta. So we basically get the code by different ones here. So let's see, we're going to do, we're going to go down here. So here's one that gets the Delta by code. So it passes the code, and Delta doesn't have a way on this SOAP service to search by codes. So we have to get all the flights, and we have to go ahead and loop through all of them until we find that code, and we add it there. So that's what we're doing there. The list all flights takes a destination also, and we can look to that and go through here, and it essentially says that there's a destination is blank, then it's going to find all the flights. If there is a destination, if it's three characters in length, it's going to go ahead and call this other method where you find the destination, find the flight by the destination. And then if the results are not null, it's going to, of course, add those results back to this flights collection. You can see this one, we had this constructor, like I showed you a minute ago, this constructor right here, that you pass in the flights record, and it adds that. So that's what that's doing right there. So, so that's the meat of the application. There's the controller has a little bit of code in it. So you look at the controller, and the controller is actually called by the Lightning Web Component. And you can see when you call search, it just passes the flight service, the destination, and calls this search method. When you call get flight by code, it passes the code over, and it calls the flight service again by code. And those are the two, search and get by code, that we see in the service right here. Search and get by code. So also the boilerplate stuff that Julio was mentioning, there's a lot of test classes as well. So you see on the SOAP service, we've got all these mocks that we have to create to mock the callouts. And then, of course, the test classes for this. And then we have a lot of mocks also for the REST endpoints as well. We mock out, of course, happy path and what happens if we don't get anything back from the call out as well. And so those tests, of course, are all right here. And with this, as you add on multiple services in this approach, you're going to be writing more and more and more test classes that you have to keep up with. So no one likes, we love writing test classes. I'm sure everybody says that to themselves when they wake up in the morning. I just want to write more test classes, but it's a necessity. And I know everybody like me has, found bugs in your code just by writing your test classes. So they're necessary. So, but there's a lot in this approach. So, okay. So now we got the API. So we got the functionality for the API, and the API doesn't have a lot of endpoints. It's essentially just a couple gets. We don't have any posts or any inputs. We're just fetching information from the API itself, from the REST endpoints and the SOAP endpoints itself. So let's go ahead and actually that up and building the design for our API in Anypoint platform. So, okay. So here's my Anypoint platform. You can get a 30-day trial. Of course, it just timed out. So let me put my stuff back in there again. That always happens on live demos, right, Julian?
Oh yeah, this is the usual, of course.
Yeah. No matter how many times
you can have a 30-day trial. So go and start your trial now.
Correct. Yep. All right. So we have there's a lot of stuff going on in Anypoint platform. Unfortunately, we can't get into all this today. We're just going to do the design center portion today. But there's also access management, there's API management, runtime manager, there's governance, visualizers, mines, secrets manager. There's a lot of stuff here in Anypoint platform. It's very feature rich, very feature rich. So, so we're going to jump in the design center. Okay. Now you can see I've already built this API once, but so I'll use it for reference. But I do have another API that has a lot more functionality that I'll show you after we get done mocking ours up here. So, okay. So what are we going to do here? So we're going to do a new one. Let's see. We're going to hit the create button here, and we're going to create a new API spec. You can do fragments or async APIs, or you can even import that from a GitHub repo if you have them in there as well. So there's a lot of ways you can get started on an API. So we're going to call this, and then we're going to design our own. So you can do things. You can have it. You can use RAML, different version of RAML. You can even use OAS if you want to. We're going to use RAML 1.0. And if you hit the guide me through it, it's going to give you a visual interface that scaffolds a lot of stuff out for you. But we're going to do it the old-fashioned way because we've been around for a long time and we like writing code. So I'm going to hit Create API.
I have worked with OpenAPI before and even covered a little bit of that here in codeLive, but I have never used RAML. So very curious to see how it looks like.
It's very similar. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create our route resources. So we're going to do a flight, because what we want to do is we want to call this, we have a destination here called flights. So we're going to call flights like that. So we're going to do, let me make this a little bigger here. Okay, we're going to do flights, and then that makes it a resource. And then if you hit enter, it goes on the next line. And you notice down here in this tray, it's content sensitive. So based on where you're at, it'll give you different options. So if you back up a little bit, you get different options than if you have things here, which is kind of interesting, kind of nice. So okay, so we have our thing there. This is our first resource, and we're going to do a get method, and then we're going to look at our responses, and our responses are going to return a 200. And of course, you can have multiple responses. You can do a 404 off here, a 500, different things like that here. And then we're going to have the body, and then we're going to return in the body application JSON. And then let's go ahead and we're going to just add an example real quick here. So I can do example, and I can do. Okay, and I didn't show this, but as I'm typing, you'll see these things are you can start seeing these endpoints as they start evolving on the side here. So, and we can actually run these. So we've got a working endpoint right now for this. So I can hit this get right here, and there is a mocking service that gets created with your project. So it gives you the URL right here, and you can call this from Postman if you want to. And it gives you a lot of stuff, like gives you code examples. You can figure out how to call this in C or in Java or JavaScript or Python. It's got a lot of code examples for you here. And it tells you your request and response that comes in there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit try it. And you see I've got no query parameters. There's no headers I need to pass in here. And I'm just going to hit send. And it brings me back my message hello. So if I want to do and hit send again, add another exclamation point, I get that again. So it's building this mocking service off this RAML that you're actually building right now. So it's pretty nice.
Beautiful. And what I love is that is instantaneous. You don't need to restart. You don't need to redeploy. It's pretty much you update and you have the change in there.
Correct. So we also are going to have a destination. So we're going to get flights by destination. So let's see. We're going to do, so now we have to backspace until we get right about there. And then we're going to do DIN8 destination. And if we go back to the documentation, you see now we have this right here. Sorry, I should show our destination right here. So we're going to do a get as well. And then we're going to do responses. So we're going to do get responses. And we're going to do another 200 response. And we're going to return this body, which is going to, again, be application JSON. And then I'm going to just do the same thing here. I'm going to do an example. And we're going to fill this in a second. I'm going to just do, so we can also do like this. You can use JSON. And now when we run this, we can do our destination. And you'll notice this one now is it's got a destination URI parameter that's required. So if I try to submit that, it's not going to let me. It's going to tell me I have invalid parameter. And it tells me which one's missing, actually, which is nice. So I can go up here and say SFO, send, and I get my hello again. Okay. So now we've got two endpoints. We have one that gets the flights, and we have one that gets the flights by destination. And let's see. So there we go. So that's that right there. So we got some simple examples. So now we wanted to actually return the data that we want to model for the endpoints. That's going to be returned back to Salesforce. So what we can do is we can make some samples. So Ramel has some cool things here. We can make a folder. Let's create a folder, and we're going to call this one examples. And what's the other one called? Let me get my files here. And we have types.
While you create the folders, we have another question from Santanu. Is there any specific cases where we can use OpenAPI specification instead of RAML? I have used only RAML, not sure where to use OpenAPI.
Correct. Yeah. So when you create this project, we chose RAML 1.0, but you can choose OAS instead of there. There's selections for that. So let's see if I can get this real quick. Let's see if we can get another real quick here. So we noticed that when we went back here, when we say create new API, we can choose the language. So there's OAS with JSON or YAML 2 or 3. So that's where you do that right there.
But when to use OpenAPI, or what cases will pretty much take me to use OpenAPI instead of
That's
RAML?
a great question. I don't know. I think it's more of just a comfort thing. We've been using, MuleSoft been using RAML for a long time. I've been personally been using OAS for a long time, but I had no problem going to RAML. So it's more of a preference thing, I think. But we prefer, and we kind of like, I don't mandate, but we kind of suggest you use RAML. That's just our preference. But you can use either one. But I think you'll probably see most of the examples are going to use RAML.
But also, like, since OpenAPI is an open specification, a lot of other like providers and companies have their APIs with OAS. So if you want to implement something around the shape of those APIs, you will have that OpenAPI specification file.
Yes.
So that's where it comes into play.
Yeah, and even also, RAML is open source as well. So okay. So we got this right here. So here's our stuff we got going on. So we have, all right, so let's talk about what the data we're going to bring back. In the Salesforce side of it, we have this flights object that it models the values, the data that's going to be returned back from the endpoints. So we're going to do the same thing essentially in our API. So we've got did it not keep our folders? Let's see. Okay. Examples and types. Okay. So we're going to add a new type here. Let's see. We're going to add a type. And we're going to call this type, We're going to call this type flight type. So it's going to be a RAML 1. It's going to be a data type. And we're going to call this flight type. Okay. So let me open this up here. I got us on my other screen here. I'm going to actually open the file and copy it in there. So this is our type. So it's called flight. The description is flight data. It's an object with the following properties. It's got an airline name, code, destination, departure, empty seats, price, and plane type. So of course you can get, a lot of these, string, number. I can't remember what the different variable types are, but the majority of them are kind of like that. You can also do collections as well, and I'll show that in a second. So that is the type.
Can I have also nested types?
Yes, you can do that as well. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. And so that's what our flight record looks like. Let's go ahead and get an example of this now. So we're going to add a couple examples, new file. We're going to do let me get right here. We're going to do get flights. Let's see. Actually, I'm going to do this instead. I'm going to, just add this. I can import this as well. So, examples, get flight. All right, so here's our examples, get flight. You can see in this example, we return a collection, which is specified by these little dashes right here. It's a collection. So we got the airline names, American, Southwest. We have the codes, we have destinations. Those are all in there as examples, okay? So we have so then we have our examples and our types. Now, how are those used? So let me go back to the flight finder here. And so what we can do is we can define that these use a type. So we could say types, and then we can do flight, which is include, and we're going to include. Okay, let's see. Types. Oh, I got the space. That's what screwed things up. There we go. If you don't have the space in there, it'll actually find it for you. So it'll do like, you can see it'll actually find it here. So we do example or flight types. So last of all, I'll give you context aware on there. So, okay, so we got the type. So now we know we're going to do types. Let's see. Now this one's going to return now. We're going to return, instead of example, we're going to return a type. Oh. We're going to return a type. And the type is going to be flight. But we're going to do an array of flights. So we're going to add an array in the end of there. And then we're going to also do an example. And then we're going to do examples, get flights RAML. Okay. So now I got that. Let's take a look at that and see how that works over here in the Explorer here. So we got flights, get. You see there now you can see that it actually shows you what the values are that are returned in the response. So it gives you that. It's going to return an array. There's our response. That's the examples that we put over here. So now if I go ahead and try it, again, no query parameters or anything, I can go ahead and just hit send for this because it gets everything. You can see this returns all the values in here. So now I can if I want to make a change to this, of course, I can just change this RAML file for the examples, and that gets updated automatically. So that's pretty cool. Because then you can actually use this to mock things out before you actually start developing your API to test it out.
It's beautiful. I don't know why I have not been using these. I usually design my APIs directly in code using annotations or using different frameworks. I'm more raw in that aspect, but this is awesome. I'm liking it.
Good. Okay, so let's do the destination now. So now we have example, and we're going to do let's see, type also, and we're going to do flight array as well. Oh, there's the other line. And then we're going to do, oops, no one told me a typo there. Example, okay, and we're going to do include examples, and we're going to use the same one. Now you can make another example file if you wanted to that just had RAML file that just had the results from a certain destination if you wanted to, but I didn't do that. So still just returning it's still just returning a collection of these flights. So, okay. So now we got the flights and the flights by destination. So let's go ahead and try that real quick here. So we got the flights. And so you see now that we got 200, and it's got, again, the what's being returned. It gives you details on what these keys are in this JSON coming back. And then you can see also we've got URI parameters that are required. We've got a string that's required. So that tells us that documentation right there. So it's self-documenting as well. And let's go ahead and try it. And this time we're going to put a destination again. You can put anything in if you wanted to. It doesn't really matter here. And then we'll hit send. And there we get our records back again. Nice. So like I said, if you wanted to make it so it's specific to a certain airport, you could have done that as well, or airline, you can do that. That's not a big deal. I just didn't have multiple example files in there.
We have a couple of questions here, Jeff. One, can we use the fetch method in LWC instead of those Apex classes in the backend to fetch the data?
Yes, not a problem whatsoever. Should not be a problem. It's an API. So yeah.
Yeah, I have something to say there. Yes, if the API is public. If the API is behind the authentication, it is not recommended to handle authentication credentials on a JavaScript file because the JavaScript file is loaded on the browser, it's loaded on the client. So you might expose things that are secure. So be careful. Yeah. Remember, we had a session about fetch. If this is public, sure, you can do it.
And this one, in this case, it is public, so you could do it. But in some other ones, like you said, we have authentications like that. You wouldn't want to do that. Not best practice. So
Yeah, and the other question from the API you are using, you can also get the location data, like the latitude and longitude of the airports, or they are not available on the original API.
they're not on this API now. This just API spun up, and then the other ones would train API from MuleSoft, so they're not available now. And unfortunately, I can't. I didn't want to build a SOAP service. I mean, if anybody's built a SOAP service, you know how much fun that is.
Oh
Did
yeah.
not want to build a SOAP service, so we didn't do that. So okay, so the last thing we talked about is like, how do you get this API out in the wild to your developers at your company? So the Anypoint platform has what's called the Exchange, and we're going to publish this API to Exchange so that people can find this and actually look at it, give you feedback on it, and start implementing it possibly in their POCs to see how things are working with it. So I'm going to hit publish. It's going to publish to Exchange. And it's going to ask for a version number. And once you start doing different version numbers, you can have multiple versions of the same API run at the same time. And I'll show you that in a second. So it's got some options here we can look at. And we're going to hit publish. That'll take a second. So typically the Exchange is internally for your company. So everybody who has an account for your company on your instance of Anypoint platform would be able to see Exchange. You can also make these public. So you can make an API public, the same documentation basically, and you can make it public for a certain amount of time, which is kind of nice as well. So let's go to Exchange now. Exchange. And so you can see I've got a couple I've built. These are, of course, I'm in a Salesforce company, so I see that as my root. You can see a bunch that are actually provided by MuleSoft, and you can start using right away. But we're going to look at the ones we just built here. So this is the one we just built, Flight Finder API. And you can see there's different versions of it. So I can look at the different versions I have of it. That one's a mocking service. So you can have the mocking service. You can have 1.1 be on a different production API or a different production service. 1.02 can be on a different service. So you can have different APIs that you can call it and reference them in your application. Here's the specifications. We got the summary. We don't have any the homepage would kind of tell you like what this API is, and here are the endpoints. They can actually test these endpoints from here the same way we were doing it a minute ago. So some of our developers in your company can come through here and actually run this themselves and kind of investigate your API, what it's doing. And then look at all the different endpoints you have, kind of like self-service for them.
And now with the mocking data is using the examples that you provided on the RAML, right?
Yes. Yep. Exactly. All this stuff comes right from the RAML. Oops, I missed a parameter here. So let's see. Let's do the same thing. So somebody who doesn't have access to the design center now, they can come and look at Exchange and see the APIs that you built, what's available, and they can get started working. Maybe send you feedback, contact you about more information. How do I use it? Stuff like that too. So
I have a question.
Sure.
Is it possible with this mock service to have a randomized return? Let's say one time you can return just one, other time you can return empty, other time you can return multiple, because that would be useful for test cases.
Yeah, in the mocking service?
Yeah, in the mocking service.
I don't know. It's a great question. I do not know. I can find out for you to ask about that. I kind of would say no, but you never know what the engineers have put in place or stuff like that. But, you never know.
Because so far for testing purposes, the APIs always work. And I would like to test what happens if I don't get results? What happens if I get more than 10, which is the limit pagination that I have defined on my component? Like things like that, maybe to see if it's possible. I'm just throwing a softball here to see if that's...
Just throw me a curveball. So,
okay.
Yeah. So you can also share this and make it, you can share it with certain team members, or you can make it public on here. You can actually select which different versions to make public. And so that will show on your organization's public portal where anybody can look at it. Or you can just share it with certain people in your company. So, well, one thing I wanted to show you also was I want to look at a different API that I wrote. It's a little bit more complex. It could be more of an idea of things you can do with this. This is one I wrote. We talked about that class, hyper automation class. This is the actual API that we write in the class, and I'll show it to you real quick. So this one right here, this one is interesting because it does use basic auth for it. You can see how easy it is to set up basic auth on here. It uses different types. It has a parts type. So the scenario is you're using a Salesforce case to get your car repaired. So your car needs some parts, and there's a parts type. There's a promotion that may be attached to it to give you discounted rates. So there's a promotion object type. There's a service type. There's of course a vehicle type. So you can do things like you can get a vehicle by a VIN, and that returns something. And you can actually post. I can show you that in a minute. You can post to that VIN a service. That service was conducted for that, and it'll return a 200. You can get a list of promotions, and you can get the different parts for promotion. So I'll kind of show you that. So if you look at, if you get a VIN, the VIN number, so let's see, it's got some URI parameters. It's required a VIN number. So essentially this is saying, here's my car. What parts do I need for this car? So I'm going to go ahead and try this. And you can see I also have a lot of these same variables in here. So I'll do a VIN number here. And here you can notice there's basic auth in here. So basic auth is baked into this design since you specified it right here in the RAML. So I'll put a username and a password, and I'll hit send. And I get my results back here. I get this is my vehicle. So I get my vehicle back by the VIN number. A good one might be also is the post. I think the service of post. Yeah. So here's the post. So the post, of course, still has basic auth. It has a VIN number. It requires a VIN number. And it also requires the body is JSON. So it gives you a sample body. Here's our sample body that we're going to have to post here. So you get that as an example when you're working with it, so you know how to get started. And then we're going to post this. So let's try this. And we'll do some VIN number. And there is our JSON that's going to be submitted with a body. And there is the basic auth. I'll hit send. And it replies back with this information right here.
Jeff, question. Does it validate the object on the post? Let's say I am not providing the properties or I'm providing a different shape. It validates that?
I think if you set up that way, it will. Yes, you can specify a type, and I think it'll tell you that the type is not correct on there. So if I have a vehicle type, it'll tell you that the type is not correct. So it won't make everything valid, it won't make everything required. So you notice like right here, these have question marks. This means that the ID is not required. So, of course, if you're creating a new record, you're not going to have an ID. But if you're getting the record, it's going to have that ID. So this RAML tells Anypoint Platform that this is not required.
Makes sense. We have another question from Ike. Can we set up JSON Web Tokens for authentication and authorization?
Yes. So if we look at right here, there's different authorizations in here. So I can get a list of them. Sometimes they'll let me do that. Let's see. Oh, it's probably down here. It's done. So there we go. There's our authentication, the basic digest OAuth. And I'm pretty sure we got JOT as well. But as you know, during demos, it's always fun dealing with authentication. So we kind of leave that out just because takes more time to set that up than anything else.
Good. We have a couple more questions from Tech Lead. Does Mule 4 support RAML 1.0?
Yes.
Awesome.
So I think it's 4.8 and 1.0, yes.
Okay. And the other one from Santanu, where are the authentication parameters mentioned? Like in case Postman, we do add the username and password, access token, etc. But here, where are they defined?
In this case, they're right here. You can see they're right here. When you do the try it, it provides you with a username and password credentials right here. So it's typically just like you would do it. You would add it in the header. In this case, it shows up right here. But when you submit it, it's passed in the header, like most credentials are.
Good. Thank you. Do you have any more questions? Because I think we are reaching out to the end of what what we wanted to do today. Or is anything else do you want to show us?
I think we're good for right now for this one. So I think we're good. We're going to jump into like API manager, runtime manager, and governance in the second day. We're going to get into those.
Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we are pretty much now getting to the end. Jeff, thank you very much for this wonderful session. Personally, I learned a lot. I can't wait to go ahead and create my trial and start playing with this new way to design an API. I will be moving from more like a raw, pure code to something more abstract and modern like this. Really, really, this was a great session. People in the chat are excited. They are like thanking you for your time, and we will see each other again in 3 weeks, if I am not wrong. You can
Yeah, I
go
think
ahead and take a look at the YouTube channel. Click on notify for the second part of this series. And we will share the source code of this repository as well. If Sarah, or the producer behind, can help me sharing that resource, it will be awesome because I cannot do it from my iPad here.
and on that resource, it's a repo, and there's two branches right now. There's an original, which is what we just saw, and the main branch is what we're going to be building on the third day. So just let you know that. And I also want to make sure you guys check out the second day, because I think coming from an Apex or Apex, Ruby, JavaScript, whatever, you're going to be blown away by what you can do in Anypoint Studio just by drag and drop and point and click. It's really, really cool. I'm not going to lie.
Nice. Fantastic. Yeah, can't wait to see how can we implement this API. So Jeff, thank you very much for your time. Any last thing that you want to say to our audience?
Thanks for coming. I really appreciate your time.
Beautiful. So I'm moving now to the last session. Thank you, Jeff. See you in the next one. And thank you very much, you all, for joining us on this codeLive session. Remember, next week we will have Alba Rivas speaking about developer tooling from scratch. There has been a lot of changes, especially on the Salesforce CLI. Now it is way more modern and easier to use. Taking a look at Code Builder, Visual Studio Code, all of the different tools that we have available for you to create awesome Salesforce applications. And stay tuned because we have more MuleSoft content coming on in the future. Thank you for joining us and see you on the next one. Bye bye.